Far from the well-lit corridors of ancient Egypt or the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the Hittites flourished in the highlands of Anatolia, what is now modern-day Turkey. For centuries, their power rivaled that of the Pharaohs and Babylonian kings. They ruled cities carved into rock, drafted treaties on clay tablets, and worshipped a pantheon of storm gods, sun queens, and sacred bulls. And then, as mysteriously as they rose, they disappeared. For over 3,000 years, the Hittites were forgotten. Their cities turned to rubble. Their language fell silent. Their name survived only in passing biblical references, scattered and misunderstood. But thanks to the quiet work of archaeologists, linguists, and curious minds, the story of the Hittites has returned piece by piece, tablet by tablet, to be told once again. As you listen tonight, you'll travel through 6 chapters. First, we'll explore their murky beginnings, small tribal confederations amid the rugged hills. Then we'll witness their ascent under kings with powerful names like Labarna and Suppiluliuma. We'll see how they negotiated with pharaohs, waged war against mighty neighbors, and signed one of the earliest known peace treaties in history. You'll walk through their daily lives, their homes and temples, their myths and meals. Then, we'll witness their fall, a quiet unraveling amid the great Bronze Age collapse. Finally, we'll trace the rediscovery of their forgotten script, as 19th century explorers uncovered a lost capital and found voices written in clay. This journey is not only about kings and empires, it's about memory, silence, and rediscovery. It's about how civilizations vanish beneath the soil and how whispers from the past can still be heard in the stillness of night. Tonight, let the story of the Hittites become part of your dreams. Let it lull you with its calm rhythms and ancient echoes. In the chapters that follow, I'll be your guide gently, patiently, like a soft-spoken historian beside a warm fire. My voice will carry you through timelines and temples, wars and weddings, gods and forgotten scripts. We begin not with a crown or a palace, but with the land itself. Rugged, forested, highland Anatolia, cold in winter, dry in summer, crisscrossed with rivers and steep ridges. A land that shapes its people. Isolated yet central. Harsh but filled with promise. Here, long before the rise of Rome, before even the pyramids saw their last stones laid, a small people began to organize, to settle, to write. They did not call themselves Hittites. That is our name for them, taken from Egyptian and biblical sources. They called themselves the people of Hatti, and their gods, chief among them, the storm god of the sky, walked with them. They built with clay and stone. They governed with law and ritual. They believed in order, in balance, and in the unseen forces that ruled the seasons and skies. So now, let your breath slow, your thoughts settle, and your mind open to a distant world. As you drift toward sleep, you will walk ancient roads. You will hear the quiet scraping of styluses on clay. You will smell the scent of warm bread and mountain pine, and you will see, just for a moment, the flickering torchlight inside a long-lost palace. The Hittites are waiting. Let us begin. As our journey begins, we find ourselves in the heart of ancient Anatolia, long before the rise of mighty cities or carved citadels. The landscape is rugged. Steep mountains roll into wide valleys, and rivers weave silver threads through thick forests and dry golden plains. This land, located in modern-day central Turkey, is the cradle of what would one day become the Hittite Empire. But first, we must look even further back, to the time before the Hittites arrived. Around 6000 BCE, long before the concept of kings and kingdoms, early Neolithic farming communities began to settle these lands. They built mud brick homes, domesticated sheep and goats, and planted barley and emmer wheat. The soil was rocky but workable, and the rivers, such as the Yazılıkaya, known in ancient times as the Halys, provided life-giving water. In time, these villages formed a network of small, interconnected cultures. Among them were the Hattians, not Hittites, but a distinct people who spoke a non-Indo-European language and worshipped a rich pantheon of earth and weather gods. The Hattians are the true first people of this region. They lived in hilltop settlements, engaged in rudimentary trade, and left behind traces of a culture steeped in nature, ritual, and ancestral ties. It is from the Hattians that the future Hittites would inherit much. Names, gods, and a spiritual worldview centered on the balance between nature and the divine. Now, let the years drift by like falling leaves in autumn. By around 2000 BCE, new peoples began to enter Anatolia. These were Indo-European-speaking groups, likely migrating slowly from the steppes north of the Black Sea. They did not come in conquest, not at first, but gradually as traders, farmers, and craftsmen. They brought with them horses, wheeled carts, and bronze tools, as well as a new way of speaking, one that would evolve into the Hittite language, the oldest known written Indo-European tongue. Among these newcomers were the people who would later form the core of the Hittite civilization. They blended with the Hattians and other local populations, adopting many cultural elements while also preserving their own traditions. This synthesis gave birth to a truly unique civilization, neither fully native nor fully foreign. As we pass into the 19th century BCE, we see the rise of the first Hittite city-states. These were not yet united. They existed as small kingdoms, often in conflict with one another, vying for trade routes and fertile land. The city of Kadesh, modern-day Kultepe, becomes a center of early Hittite culture. It hosts a remarkable Assyrian trading colony known as a Karum, which provides valuable connections to the wider Mesopotamian world. The Assyrians brought not only tin and textiles, but also a writing system, cuneiform, pressed into clay tablets. The Hittites, eager learners, began using this script to record their own language and traditions. Here, in the dusty storerooms of Kadesh, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of clay tablets, contracts, letters, even recipes that give us an unparalleled glimpse into the lives of ordinary people. Let's imagine for a moment walking through the streets of early Kadesh. The houses are low and rectangular, made of mud brick with flat roofs. Smoke drifts from cooking fires. Children play near clay ovens. Merchants argue gently over the price of copper or wool, while scribes bend over tablets, styluses in hand, copying out contracts under flickering oil lamps. It is in this world, busy but small, that the seeds of empire are quietly taking root. Around 1650 BCE, one local warlord begins to rise above the others. His name is Labarna. He is both a conqueror and a unifier. With careful diplomacy and occasional warfare, he brings together the disparate Hittite cities into a single realm. Later kings would take the name Labarna as a royal title, a symbol of continuity and legitimacy. Labarna establishes his capital at a city called Hattusa, located in a defensible mountain valley, surrounded by stone walls and steep cliffs. The city itself had once been destroyed, but Labarna rebuilds it with purpose. From this point forward, Hattusa becomes the spiritual and administrative heart of the Hittite world. But the early Hittite kingdom is still fragile. Labarna is succeeded by a king named Hattusili, the first, the man of Hattusa. He is a powerful and sometimes ruthless figure. His reign is marked by military campaigns into Syria, where he attempts to assert Hittite influence over the rich trade cities of the Levant. Yet it is not merely ambition that drives him. In Hittite ideology, the king is not just a ruler. He is a servant of the gods, responsible for upholding divine order. This idea, that the king is chosen by the gods to maintain cosmic balance, will become a cornerstone of Hittite governance. Rituals, omens, and dream interpretations all play a role in royal decisions. Before battles or major reforms, the king must consult with oracles and seers. And yet, We also begin to see cracks within the royal house. At the end of his reign, Hattusili I is forced to disown his original heir and name a new successor, his grandson, Mursili I. He leaves behind a will written on a clay tablet in which he explains his reasons. This document, still preserved today, offers a rare, deeply personal glimpse into ancient royal life, a blend of family drama, divine duty, and political maneuvering. Under Mursili I, the young empire reaches a stunning new milestone. Around 1595 BCE, Mursili leads a daring expedition, not just into Syria, but all the way into Mesopotamia. He marches his army nearly 1,000 kilometers south and sacks the great city of Babylon. It is an audacious act, a flash of Hittite power that stuns the ancient world. And yet, Mursili's success is short-lived. Upon returning home, he is assassinated in a palace coup. The kingdom falls into a period of instability and internal conflict. Let your breath grow slow now, as the dust settles over ancient stone walls. The empire is still young, still uncertain, still searching for a stable identity. But its foundations have been laid. Writing has taken root. A royal tradition has begun. Hattusa is rising from the earth like a sleeping giant. The Hittites are no longer merely highland tribes or foreign settlers. They are becoming something new, a people with law, with architecture, with a sense of destiny. As the stars wheel above Anatolia and the winds move through the mountain passes, the Hittites prepare to enter their golden age. Let us follow them there. As dawn breaks over the stone terraces of Hattusa, a new chapter in Hittite history begins to unfold. One shaped by strong kings, ambitious reforms, and the slow, steady rise of an empire that would one day stand among the great powers of the ancient world. We are now in the 15th century BCE. The Hittite realm, once fractured by rival factions and palace intrigues, begins to take on a more unified, deliberate shape. At its heart stands the city of Hattusa, a remarkable urban center built into the natural rock formations of central Anatolia. Let's take a moment to imagine walking through the city at its peak. The stone streets curve with the land. Cyclopean walls made of enormous limestone blocks rise like cliffs on all sides. Gateways are flanked by carved lions or sphinxes, protectors of the realm. Inside the walls, terraced levels hold homes, workshops, granaries, and temples. High above, the royal acropolis looms, where kings pray, rule, and sleep beneath cedar-beamed ceilings. This is not a sprawling city like Thebes or Nineveh. Hattusa is compact and austere, a city of stone and wind shaped by the mountains, carved by intent. At the center of this emerging imperial power stands a new dynasty, a line of rulers who stabilize the realm and establish the foundations of what scholars now call the Hittite New Kingdom, or Empire period. Among these rulers, one name rises like a mountain on the horizon: Suppiluliuma I. Suppiluliuma is remembered as one of the greatest kings of Hittite history, his reign. Around 1350 BCE marks the high point of Hittite political and military power. But before we look at his achievements, let's explore how the royal system functioned. The Hittite king was both secular and sacred. He led the army in times of war, judged disputes in court, and conducted important religious ceremonies. He was often called the Sun, a symbolic title borrowed from the gods, not because he claimed divinity, but because he was believed to channel divine order into the world. Beneath the king stood a layered administration: officials, scribes, governors, and priests, many of them members of the extended royal family. The queen, known by the title Tawanana, also played a significant role. She held religious authority and sometimes even retained her title after the king's death, guiding her son or grandson in state matters. Succession, however, was rarely smooth. Hittite kingship was not always inherited by the eldest son. competence, political alliances, and divine favor often played a stronger role. This led to frequent disputes, power struggles, and at times, outright civil war. And yet, through this turbulence, the state grew stronger. Under Suppiluliuma I, the Hittite Empire expanded dramatically, both in territory and prestige. He reorganized the army, improved fortifications, and launched bold campaigns into northern Syria. One by one, rival city-states and former allies of Egypt fell under Hittite control. His most famous conquest was the kingdom of Mitanni, a former great power that had long dominated the region between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Suppiluliuma skillfully undermined Mitanni through a mix of diplomacy and warfare, eventually capturing its capital and absorbing its lands. By the end of his reign, the Hittite realm stretched from western Anatolia to the edges of the Levant, a vast and diverse empire bound by treaties, vassal kings, and an intricate web of oaths. Let's pause now and listen to the wind echoing through the halls of the royal archive. Because it is here, in these cool stone rooms, that the Hittites recorded one of their most lasting contributions to history: their treaties. The Hittites were masters of diplomacy. They crafted formal agreements with neighboring powers, documents that laid out terms of peace, mutual defense, and allegiance. These treaties were sealed with ritual oaths, and copies were exchanged between courts. Many of them survive to this day, pressed into clay tablets in cuneiform script. One of the most extraordinary is the Treaty of Kadesh, signed later under a different king, but built on the groundwork laid by Suppiluliuma. This treaty, made between the Hittites and the Egyptians, is the oldest known international peace treaty in the world. But we're not there yet. Let us return to Suppiluliuma. Toward the end of his reign, a strange and tragic episode occurs, one that reveals both the fragility and reach of Hittite power. According to Hittite records, an Egyptian queen, likely Ankhesenamun, widow of Tutankhamun, sent a letter to Suppiluliuma. She asked him to send one of his sons to marry her and become pharaoh. Her message, as translated from the clay tablet, reads, "My husband has died. I have no son. If you send me one of your sons, he shall become my husband. I am afraid." It is a moment unlike any other, a window into royal vulnerability and the interconnectedness of ancient empires. Suppiluliuma agrees. He sends his son. But the young prince never reaches Egypt. He is intercepted and killed, likely by factions within the Egyptian court. Suppiluliuma is outraged. In retaliation, he wages war in the borderlands of Syria. But in the chaos, something far more dangerous arrives: disease. The returning Hittite soldiers bring back a plague, likely smallpox or a similar virus, which sweeps through the population and claims the life of the great king himself. And so, the empire passes into the hands of his son, Mursili II. Mursili II, though young and untested, proves to be a capable ruler. His annals, inscribed on tablets and preserved for centuries, describe his campaigns, dreams, fears, and triumphs in remarkable detail. We learn that he, too, was deeply spiritual. He sought the favor of the gods, consulted oracles, and performed elaborate purification rituals to drive out the plague. He also faced constant rebellions in western Anatolia, which he quelled through a mix of patience and force. Yet Mursili's greatest legacy may not be military, but literary. His records form one of the most personal and vivid voices in all of Bronze Age history. He speaks not as a distant king, but as a thoughtful man, struggling with burdens, questioning fate, and seeking meaning. Let your thoughts now rest on the image of a king writing by lamplight, not just orders but reflections, as the empire sleeps around him. After Mursili, the Hittite Empire enters its full maturity. Hattusa becomes a city of grand palaces, archive houses, and temples. The state is ruled with legal codes, diplomatic traditions, and an increasingly complex bureaucracy. The world itself is also changing. To the south, Egypt recovers and asserts its strength. To the east, the Assyrians grow bolder. To the west, new threats stir among the Aegean peoples. And within the Hittite realm, internal tensions, always simmering, begin once again to rise. But in this moment, in this chapter of stillness and strength, the empire stands tall. From the mountain roads of Anatolia to the sun-swept towns of northern Syria, the banner of the Hittite sun shines over marketplaces, fortresses, and farms. Messengers carry clay letters between capitals. Priests tend fires at high altars. Farmers bring grain to the royal granaries. And the kings, with their God-given mandate, hold the balance of the realm. Between sky and earth, order and chaos. As you close your eyes now, let the hum of this world surround you. Feel the texture of a clay tablet, the rustle of linen robes, the deep stillness of stone streets under moonlight. You are in the age of kings, and the world is listening. We now find ourselves in the late 13th century BCE, a time of both glory and peril for the Hittite Empire. The kingdom has grown into a sprawling imperial network, stretching across much of Anatolia and into the Levant. Dozens of cities, vassal kingdoms, and frontier outposts now pay tribute to Hattusa. But with such size comes complexity, and an empire must be more than territory. It must be held together by something stronger than stone. The Hittites, as we've seen, were not only warriors, they were masterful diplomats. Their cuneiform archives contain hundreds of letters, contracts, and oaths exchanged with other powers: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and the many smaller city-states in between. These letters, often called Amarna letters when found in Egypt, reveal a world of ritualized courtesy, clever negotiation, and symbolic exchange. Kings addressed each other as brother, regardless of geography, as long as they were equals in power. They exchanged daughters in marriage, gifts of gold and lapis lazuli, and sacred objects. The tone was formal, but not without hidden tension. A late letter from a Hittite king to the pharaoh includes this gentle reproach: "You sent me gold, but it was not real. The surface was gold, but inside was not gold. My brother, why do you deceive me?" This network of diplomacy was a fragile web held together by honor, mutual benefit, and the memory of war. Because war, too, was never far from hand. The Hittites had a professional army centered around elite chariotry. Their chariots were faster and lighter than those of their Egyptian rivals. A typical Hittite chariot carried 3 men, a driver, a warrior armed with a spear or bow, and a shield-bearer. This gave them greater stability and flexibility in battle, especially in the rough terrain of Anatolia. But these chariots were expensive. They required bronze fittings, trained horses, and skilled crews. And so, while war was frequent, it was rarely chaotic. Battles were usually seasonal, strategic, and well-documented, sometimes even staged as part of ritual or law. One of the most famous examples of Hittite warfare takes us to the plains of Kadesh in modern-day Syria. It is the year 1274 BCE. The Hittite king, Muwatalli II, marches south to confront the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II. The city of Kadesh has become a flashpoint, a valuable fortress at the edge of Hittite influence. Both empires want it. Both consider it theirs. The Egyptians record the battle in dramatic terms. Ramesses, caught by surprise, rallies his forces in a moment of near-mythical bravery. Hittite records, by contrast, are more reserved, but suggest that Muwatalli achieved his objective and held the city. The truth, as is often the case in history, lies somewhere in between. The Battle of Kadesh was not a clear victory for either side. It ended in a kind of stalemate, one so exhausting, so evenly matched, that neither empire wanted to resume hostilities. And so, after years of tense diplomacy, the two powers did something remarkable. They made peace. The Treaty of Kadesh, signed around 1259 BCE, is the world's oldest surviving international peace treaty. Written in both Hittite and Egyptian and preserved in multiple copies, it lays out terms of mutual defense, prisoner exchange, and lasting friendship. It is, quite literally, a moment of world diplomacy, and its legacy endures. Today, a replica of the treaty hangs on the wall of the United Nations headquarters in New York, a testament to the Hittites' lasting impact on the idea of peace through dialogue. But even as the Hittites negotiate with their great rivals, the empire's borders remain restless. To the west, rebellious kingdoms in Arzawa test the empire's patience. To the east, Assyria begins to rise hungry for power, eager to expand. And within the Hittite realm, the cost of empire begins to show. Supply lines stretch thin. Armies must be maintained. Royal courts become crowded with scribes, governors, generals, and distant relatives, each with their own ambitions. Still, Hattusa remains strong. Its streets are bustling. Temple priests oversee offerings to the storm god and the sun goddess. Architects repair the great lion gate. Messengers race along the stone-paved royal road, bringing word from faraway lands. And in the great temple, sacred rituals continue as they have for generations, offerings of bread, beer, oil, and incense to a pantheon of gods whose names are as old as stone. Yet even here, even in these rituals, change begins to stir. For the Hittites, religion was never static. Their empire was a mosaic of cultures. Hattian, Luwian, Hurrian, and Mesopotamian influences blended into a rich and ever-shifting tapestry. As the empire expanded, so did its pantheon. Local gods were not suppressed, but adopted. New temples appeared beside old ones. The Hittites spoke often of the 1,000 gods of Hatti, a term that reveals both their tolerance and their uncertainty. With so many gods, one might forget whose favor to seek. This openness, while spiritually rich, sometimes created confusion. Priests had to remember hundreds of rituals, prayers, and festival calendars. Each god had its own rules, and failure to perform them properly was believed to bring disaster, drought, plague, or defeat. In such times of uncertainty, the king was expected to act as intercessor. One Hittite king, Hattusili III, left behind remarkable personal letters and prayers in which he pleads with the gods for mercy, clarity, and strength. His words are not commands, but appeals filled with humility and fatigue. It is Hattusili III who rules in the years following the Battle of Kadesh, and it is his wife, Puduhepa, who emerges as one of the most powerful queens in ancient Near Eastern history. Puduhepa was not just a consort. She was a priestess, a diplomat, a mother, and a political force in her own right. Her name appears in treaties, letters, and royal decrees. She corresponded directly with foreign monarchs, including the Pharaohs' wives. Her signature carries authority. Her words reflect wisdom. Together, Hattusili and Puduhepa represent the last great flowering of Hittite culture and statecraft. They embody a vision of empire that values law over conquest, prayer over pride, and diplomacy over destruction. And yet, as we drift toward the twilight of this chapter, we must acknowledge the shadows gathering at the edges of the map. Trade is slowing. Crops fail in some regions. Earthquakes and plagues strike with growing frequency. Rebellions flicker in the borderlands, and a new threat appears silent, swift, and hard to trace. We call them the Sea Peoples. Their origins are mysterious. Some scholars believe they came from the Aegean, others suggest the Balkans or islands lost to time. But their impact is clear. Around 1200 BCE, coastal cities begin to fall. Ports are burned, granaries are emptied, palaces collapse in fire and silence. The Hittite Empire, though inland, cannot escape the ripple effect. Hattusa becomes isolated. The flow of tribute falters. Governors lose contact with the capital. Local powers begin to break away. The once great empire begins to fragment not with a roar, but a slow crumbling. But that tale belongs to another chapter. For now, as you rest in the afterglow of golden days, imagine the empire at its height, not just of power, but of wisdom. Treaties carved in clay, chariots glinting at dawn, priests offering wine to forgotten gods, a queen reading foreign letters by lamplight, and in the distance, the soft tread of change. Let your breath grow slower now. The world is large, the stars are watching, and the Hittite sun still burns high above the Anatolian plain. As we drift deeper into the Hittite Empire, we leave the royal courts and battlefields behind. Instead, we step into the sunlit courtyards of ordinary homes, wander through the sacred halls of temples, and sit beside the hearths where families once gathered whispering prayers to gods older than memory. To understand the Hittites fully, we must understand how they lived and how they believed. We begin in the countryside. Here, in the rolling hills and fertile valleys of central Anatolia, most Hittites lived as farmers, herders, and craftsmen. Their villages were built with mud brick houses, usually rectangular, with flat roofs and small courtyards where animals were kept and grain was threshed. The air is rich with the scent of earth and smoke. Chickens cluck softly. A woman grinds barley at a stone mill, rhythmically turning the wheel. Children chase one another between fig trees. In the distance, a shepherd sings to his flock as he leads them to higher pastures. Life was seasonal and communal. Families worked the land together. They raised sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. They grew wheat, barley, lentils, and grapes. Surplus goods were taken to market towns or paid as tribute to the state, a form of taxation managed by royal officials. Clothing was simple but functional linen tunics in summer, wool in winter. Men and women often wore belts, cloaks, and sandals. Jewelry was common: bronze bracelets, carved beads, and small amulets to ward off evil. At night, homes were lit with oil lamps. Meals were cooked in clay ovens. The most common dish was a kind of thick porridge, flavored with herbs, lentils, or meat when available. Beer and wine were consumed in moderation, often during festivals or family gatherings. And woven into this daily rhythm was something deeper, a sense that the world was alive with spirit. The Hittites were among the most religious peoples of the ancient world. They believed that the universe was sustained not by force, but by balance, a sacred order called kissa, maintained through ritual, offering, and obedience to the gods. And there were many gods. In fact, the Hittites proudly called their kingdom the land of 1,000 gods. This was not poetic exaggeration. Their empire, built from diverse cultures, absorbed the deities of conquered peoples. Local gods were adopted into the state pantheon, honored in their own cities with their own rites. At the top of this divine hierarchy stood the storm god, known as Tarhunt or Teshub, depending on the region. He was the bringer of rain and fertility, but also of thunder and wrath. He ruled the heavens and stood as the protector of kings. Beside him was the sun goddess of Arena, radiant, gentle, and wise. She was the goddess of order, oaths, and justice, and often served as the mediator between gods and men. But these were only the most prominent. There were deities of rivers, mountains, doors, gates, and even plagues. Every city had its own protectors. Every profession had a patron spirit. The Hittite spiritual world was vast, layered, and intimate. In the capital city of Hattusa, dozens of temples stood, not just buildings, but sacred thresholds where the human and divine met. Each temple was designed with care: an outer courtyard for gathering, a central chamber for offerings, and an inner sanctum, dark, quiet, and sacred, where the god's statue or symbol resided. These sanctums were not open to the public. Only priests, priestesses, and royalty could enter. And when they did, they brought with them offerings: loaves of bread, jars of oil, wine, honey, and incense. Sometimes animals were sacrificed: goats, sheep, or birds, their blood believed to renew the bond between heaven and earth. Festivals were frequent and elaborate. There was the Puruli festival celebrating the renewal of life in spring. The Kylam festival honored trade, abundance, and divine protection. Entire cities would participate feasting, singing, dancing, and processing through the streets with banners and sacred objects. Music played a vital role. The Hittites used lyres, flutes, drums, and rattles in their ceremonies. Dancers moved in measured steps. Songs were sung in multiple languages, Hittite, Hurrian, Luwian, reflecting the empire's cultural mosaic. And always at the center stood ritual. For the Hittites believed that if a ritual was done improperly, if a word was missed, or a gesture skipped, the gods might turn away. So every movement, every chant, was recorded on clay tablets, copied by scribes, and preserved in temple libraries. These ritual texts, some over 3,000 years old, have survived to our time, a testament to how deeply the Hittites valued precision in their relationship with the sacred. The spiritual life of the Hittites extended beyond official temples. In village homes and marketplaces, people practiced folk rituals, used protective charms, and consulted diviners. Illness was often seen as a sign of divine displeasure, a punishment for a broken oath, a forgotten offering, or contact with something impure. To heal, one might consult a healer priest, someone trained in both medicine and magic. These practitioners used herbs, incantations, and symbolic acts. For example, to drive out sickness, a model of the patient might be carved from dough, cursed, and then burned or thrown into a river, symbolically carrying the illness away. Omens were taken very seriously. A sneeze at the wrong time, a dream of falling, or the sudden cry of a raven could all be interpreted as signs. The liver of a sacrificed animal might be read like a map, its shape, color, and texture believed to reflect the mood of the gods. And dreams. Oh, how seriously they took dreams. Some kings employed royal dream interpreters. If a dream was especially troubling, a purification ritual might be held the next morning. Water was poured over the dreamer's head, incense was burned, and words of protection were spoken. It was a world where meaning could be found in every shadow, and this search for meaning brought comfort especially in times of drought, war, or illness. Hittite society, while patriarchal in structure, afforded women a surprising degree of agency. Women could own property, conduct business, inherit land, and serve as priestesses. Some noble women acted as judges, others managed estates or temples. And at the highest levels, as we saw with Queen Puduhepa, women could wield significant political influence. Marriage was usually arranged sealed by contracts and dowries, but evidence suggests that mutual affection was common. Hittite laws included protections for wives, and divorce, while rare, was legally recognized. Children were cherished. Boys were trained in farming or crafts. Noble sons were taught writing, math, and diplomacy. Girls learned domestic skills, religious rites, and, in noble houses, the art of letter writing and herbal medicine. Death, too, was treated with reverence. The dead were usually cremated, their ashes placed in urns, and buried with grave goods, tools, jewelry, or food for the afterlife. Some tombs contained carved stones with inscriptions, short, solemn prayers asking the gods to care for the soul of the departed, and in their final rest, Hittites believed the dead joined the spirits of ancestors, a silent, unseen presence that lingered in the land and watched over the living. What emerges from this portrait is a civilization not of extremes, but of balance. The Hittites were both stern and tender. They feared their gods, but also sang to them. They followed law, but made room for mercy. Their rituals were elaborate, yet their homes were humble. Their empire was vast, but their hearts remained close to the land. They believed in duty to the king, to the gods, to one another. And through that duty, they carved order out of chaos. Even now, as we walk through their memory among stone tablets, ruined gates, and forgotten hymns, we can sense that balance. A hush, a stillness, a civilization at peace with its place in the world. Let your thoughts grow slower now. You are walking through the sacred courtyard of a Hittite temple. Incense curls in the air. A lyre plays softly in the distance. The stone beneath your feet is warm. A priest speaks a quiet blessing in a language only the gods still remember. And overhead, the sky is vast and blue as it was then, as it always will be. The fall of a civilization rarely comes suddenly. It begins quietly with missed harvests, broken treaties, and whispers of rebellion. And by the time the storm arrives, the foundations have already crumbled. So it was with the Hittites. In this chapter, we drift through the last chapters of Hatti's story, through war and famine, mystery and loss, until the great city of Hattusa is left to the wind and the wild. The final centuries of the Hittite Empire, roughly 1300 to 1200 BCE, were marked by both splendor and strain. Under rulers like Suppiluliuma I and his successors, the Hittite state reached its greatest extent. It controlled territory stretching from western Anatolia to northern Syria, rivaling Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon in power. But this golden age was built on fragile ground. The empire was vast but thinly stretched. Its roads were long, its vassals often restless. Communication could take weeks. Rebellions smoldered in the outer provinces. Grain had to be imported from Syria just to feed the capital. Worse still, climate patterns were beginning to shift. Studies of tree rings and lake sediments suggest that around 1200 BCE, the region experienced a sharp drop in rainfall, perhaps a prolonged drought. Crops failed, herds died, and when food grows scarce, so does loyalty. The world was becoming unstable, and somewhere beyond the horizon, new forces were gathering. Around the same time in lands to the west and south, a mysterious phenomenon began to unfold. Groups known to us only as the Sea Peoples began to appear in historical records. They are mentioned in Egyptian texts, depicted in battle scenes on temple walls, and referred to by names like the Shurden, Luca, and Peliset. Who were they? Scholars still debate this. Some believe they were displaced tribes from the Aegean, driven by famine or war. Others think they were pirates, mercenaries, or climate refugees. What's clear is that they moved across the eastern Mediterranean, attacking cities, burning ports, and leaving collapse in their wake. The Hittites were not spared. Hittite outposts in western Anatolia were among the first to fall. Then Ugarit, a wealthy port city under Hittite protection, sent desperate letters begging for help. The enemy ships have arrived. The city is burning. The gods have abandoned us. No reply came. The Hittite army was likely too weakened to respond. The great cities of the empire began to fall not all at once, but steadily, like torches being extinguished in the night. And then, sometime around 1190 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Hattusa, the imperial capital, the beating heart of Hittite power, was abandoned. We do not know precisely why. There is no final inscription, no last royal proclamation. But archaeology tells us enough. The outer defenses were breached. The temples were looted. The royal archives, once filled with thousands of clay tablets, were left scattered and broken. Whole buildings were burned. The city, once echoing with prayers and politics, fell silent. Did the Sea Peoples sack it? Possibly, but others believe the final blow came from within, from civil war, famine, or disease. One theory suggests that rival claimants to the throne tore the empire apart. Another posits that the vassal kingdoms in Syria, resentful of Hittite rule, rose up in rebellion. With the empire weakened by drought, trade collapse, and economic turmoil, it may have simply imploded. In the end, no army came to rebuild. No king returned to reclaim the throne, and the land of Hatti became a memory. Yet even in collapse, the Hittite legacy did not vanish entirely. Across southeastern Anatolia and northern Syria, smaller kingdoms emerged known today as the Neo-Hittite states. These were descendants of the old empire. Same language family, similar gods, same script carved into stone. But these states were regional, not imperial. Cities like Carchemish, Melid, and Kumu retained elements of Hittite culture well into the 8th century BCE. They built temples, raised fortifications, and even corresponded with Assyrian kings. In Carchemish, the son of the last great Hittite king Suppiluliuma II may have ruled as a regional governor or king in exile. But it was no longer the age of empires. The old unity was gone. And one by one, even these outposts were absorbed by rising powers Assyria, Babylon, and eventually Persia. By 600 BCE, the last Hittite dialects had fallen silent. The last inscriptions had been carved. The memory of Hatti faded into legend. For nearly 3,000 years, the Hittites vanished from history. The Bible mentions a people called the Hittites, but scholars long assumed they were a small Canaanite tribe, not an empire. Ancient Greeks and Romans had no record of them. Even in the lands where they once ruled, the memory was erased. The great city of Hattusa lay buried beneath earth and grass. Its walls became part of the hills. Its temples were forgotten. It was as if the Hittites had never existed. Only fragments survived, broken seals, strange tablets, crumbling statues in remote villages. A few clues hinted at something larger, but no one knew what they meant. Until, slowly, the earth began to speak again. In the early 20th century, archaeologists began to uncover ruins near a modern Turkish village called Boğazköy. They found massive stone gates, lion statues, and thousands upon thousands of clay tablets written in a forgotten script. At first, no one could read them. But then scholars realized this was a lost language. And not just any language, but one of the oldest Indo-European tongues ever discovered. Over decades, linguists cracked the code. They translated royal letters, law codes, hymns, treaties, and prayers. And suddenly, a forgotten world came rushing back into the light. We learned the names of kings, the names of gods, the laws they lived by, the songs they sang, and the cities they ruled. Hattusa, once buried in silence, spoke again, and the Hittites re-entered history. What can we say now in the hush of night about the fall of Hatti? It was not just a military defeat. It was the unraveling of a worldview, a collapse of the delicate balance between earth and sky, king and subject, human and divine. And yet, there's something beautiful in the silence they left behind, because that silence held their memory safe. When their cities fell, their tablets remained. When their language vanished, the clay preserved it. And when the winds buried their temples, the stones remembered. So let your breath slow now. Imagine the ruins of Hattusa beneath a pale moon. The wind moves gently through broken columns. Somewhere, a fox crosses a forgotten road. And above it all, the stars look down, the same stars that once watched over the kings of Hatti. Empires rise and fall, but memory endures. And tonight, you carry the memory of the Hittites not as a myth, but as a people who lived, who loved, who prayed, and who dreamed beneath the Anatolian sky. As we enter the final chapter of our exploration, we leave behind the dust of collapsed walls and scorched temples. Now we step into a different kind of space, a museum hall, a quiet study, a mind gently drifting to sleep. This is the afterlife of history, the legacy of the Hittites. They vanished for millennia, and yet, somehow, they never truly left. Let us now explore the enduring impact of this forgotten civilization, how their language, laws, and ideas continue to whisper through the corridors of time. One of the most profound contributions of the Hittites lies not in stone, but in speech. When linguists first decoded the tablets from Hattusa, they were stunned to realize that Hittite was an Indo-European language, a cousin to Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and even modern English. But it wasn't just another Indo-European language, it was the oldest written one ever found. The implications were extraordinary. For centuries, scholars had tried to trace the origins of Indo-European languages, a linguistic family that now spans Europe and much of Asia. The discovery of Hittite pushed that history back centuries, revealing new branches and deeper roots. The Hittites didn't just shape their own world, they helped us understand our world, how languages migrate, evolve, and connect. Every time we speak a word descended from that ancient family, we echo something very old. A Hittite lullaby, perhaps. A royal decree, a prayer to a forgotten god. The Hittites were also pioneers of structured law. Long before the Romans, they developed a legal system that was remarkably humane for its time. Their laws covered everything from theft and marriage to land ownership and injury. But what's truly striking is their tone. Where Babylonian law codes, like Hammurabi's, often prescribed death for minor offenses, the Hittites favored fines and restitution. They focused more on restoring balance than punishing harshly. For example, if someone stole livestock, they had to repay the animal sometimes with interest, but not with their life. If a person injured another, the compensation was clearly outlined. This suggests a society deeply concerned with fairness, order, and community. Their laws even included protection for women and servants, a rare feature in the ancient world. In the quiet of their courtroom tablets, we glimpse a civilization striving not just for power, but for justice. Though the great temples of Hattusa lie in ruins, their influence lingers in the visual imagination of the ancient world. Massive stone lions and sphinxes once guarded their gates, symbols of strength and sacred protection. The use of cyclopean stonework, those impossibly large, rough-hewn blocks later, inspired both Etruscan and Anatolian architecture. Hittite rock reliefs, carved directly into cliff faces, show kings, gods, and processions in a style both formal and deeply expressive. These images carried spiritual weight. To look upon a king in stone was to see him eternally in ritual. The layout of Hittite temples, with inner sanctuaries hidden behind layers of chambers, influenced later religious architecture, from Greek temples to early Anatolian churches. Their artistic legacy is not loud. It's not golden or boastful. It's quiet, thoughtful, monumental, like the civilization itself. The Hittites left behind more than 30,000 clay tablets, one of the largest archives of the ancient world. These tablets preserve royal decrees, international treaties, religious hymns, medical texts, diplomatic correspondence, and even mythological tales. Perhaps most famous is the Treaty of Kadesh, signed with Ramses II of Egypt after the Great Battle of the same name. It is considered one of the world's first international peace treaties written in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Akkadian cuneiform, with copies placed in both capitals. In these texts, we find the workings of an early bureaucracy, the dreams of kings, and the rhythms of daily life. We learn what foods were eaten, what gods were worshipped, and what fears filled the hearts of the people. Each tablet is a voice preserved in clay. And thanks to these voices, the Hittites have become one of the best documented ancient peoples in all of Anatolia. The Hittites influenced their neighbors in quiet but lasting ways. Their gods, especially the storm god, Tarhunt, continued to be worshipped long after the empire fell. Hittite religious festivals were absorbed into Luwian, Phrygian, and later Greco-Roman traditions. Their concept of kingship, a ruler, as both warrior and priest, shaped later models in Assyria and Urartu. Even the idea of empire in Anatolia began with them. Centuries later, when Persian rulers or Roman governors marched through the region, they built their roads and cities on foundations the Hittites had laid. In the Anatolian plateau, history does not end. It layers, and the Hittites were the first to lay those stones. And so now, in this final stretch of our journey, we return to a simple question. Why do the Hittites matter? They matter because they remind us that greatness is not always loud. That complexity can be buried in silence. that entire empires can be forgotten, not because they were unworthy, but because time is a river that rarely looks back. They matter because they held the line between heaven and earth, forging a world of gods and treaties, of rituals and roadways, of laws and lullabies. They matter because they remind us how fragile civilization can be and how resilient memory truly is. You've now traveled across 3,000 years, across mountains and marshes, courts and kitchens, temples and tombs. You've met kings and queens, gods and generals, priests and poets. And as your eyelids grow heavier, know this. The Hittites were once forgotten. Now they are remembered. And in this quiet moment, you are a part of that remembering. So breathe deeply. Let the echoes of Hattusa settle softly in your dreams, and let sleep carry you gently through the shadows of ancient Anatolia, where lions still guard ruined gates and tablets whisper in clay.